Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how to position the towers on your Gamma turntable at the absolute optimum spot, because I'll pop this off of the machine in a second and show you what it looks like down here. I know that you can't see it from this vantage point, but there's a bolt down here and a single bolt over here on the other end where it'll allow you to move these towers inwards along this track or a little bit further outward. Right now I don't have them completely out, and obviously they're not completely in. I have them just at the right spot. I'm going to reveal where that spot is. A lot of people have had issues with trying to fit a certain mounting a certain racket on their machine, and then not really taking into account that that they move, or B, that how to move them. But I figured out long ago. I wondered, is there an optimum placement to put these towers so that you almost would never have to move them in or out? Because with this particular turntable, to do that, to adjust them, you have to loosen it with a hex wrench. In other words, you have to grab a tool, loosen a bolt here, slide it in, and you really should do it on both sides. You shouldn't just extend one side out or the other and not the opposite side. So you want to keep these towers equidistant from the center of the turntable, or equal distance from the ends if you want to measure from the ends. And I'll give you some measurements in a moment. So I'm going to talk about how to optimally place your towers so that you almost never will have to move them within reason. I mean, if someone brings you a badminton racket, you're going to have to adjust them. If someone brings you a Gamma Big Bubba 137 square inch tennis racket, you'll probably have to adjust them. But I found the Goldilocks, the sweet spot, to position them so that you're pretty well covered from anything from, say, a Pro Staff 6.0 that has an 85 square inch hoop, all the way up to super oversized rackets that are, 120 square inch, 118 square inches. So basically, if it's bigger than 118 square inches, you might have to extend these even further. And if it's a wooden racket, this position right here will almost fit a wooden racket, but not quite. I wouldn't feel good about it. You wouldn't have enough threads on this support. And I'll show you that. But anyway, I want to talk about how to position these and set this up for optimum positioning so that you don't really have to fool with it. And how this pertains to a talk tennis conversation. So this is from the name of this thread. This is obviously over in the stringing forum. And the title of this thread is Large Racket Stringing Help. And it was originally posted by ClownCar96. And his initial post was, someone dropped a head TI S6 off for me to string, ... How do I string this boat or, ? My center mounts come nowhere close to touching the frame. I'm sure there's an accessory for my Gamma X ELS for this situation. So, and I responded, and I'll read it to you in a moment. So first of all, we now know that he's using a Gamma X ELS, which is the tabletop electronic version. It's got the same type turntable. It's just got a rotational gripper electronic over here. Most of the turntables are the same across the line of Gamma products. Now, the turntables that are on the drop weight machines are a little bit different in design, and can tell you how to optimize the placement on that in a moment. 99.9% of the time, I actually use my 2-point turntable, so-called 2-point turntable. It's really a 4-point. This is what's on my machine almost all the time. And I'll talk about this in a moment, but that one is extremely adjustable, this is extremely adjustable, and so is the turntable on the drop weight. So any Gamma machine, they're extremely versatile in regards to how small of a racket and how large of a racket that you can string on them. So we know that ClownCar96 has a Gamma X ELS, which is the equivalent of a progression ELS. It's just one has the red base and one has the blue base. Now, so he's trying to string up a head TI-S6. For those of you who don't know what a TI-S6 is, you can go Google it, look at an image. One thing is, he didn't mention it here, but I know this. It's a 115 square inch racket. Now, I don't have one here. I'd be showing it to you. But imagine a 115 square inch racket. And this is a small thing, a side note, is that racket, the mains are not perfectly parallel. It has a slight fan shape on the mains. That ties into something brought up by Brown Bear Falling later on. I'll read what Brown Bear Falling said, and my comments about that. But anyway, so, and he said his center mounts come nowhere clear. He's talking about his center mounts. He's referring to this 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock support. So clearly, he mounted the racket. Imagine my hands are the hoop. And despite adjusting these all the way in, sucking that in as far as it would go, because it can only go so far, it was probably touching at 12 o'clock but not at 6 o'clock, or it was touching at 6 o'clock but not quite at 12. And the solution is, as someone else pointed out, is that the towers themselves were not far enough apart. Now, let's say you have a gamma machine and you've been stringing rackets of a normal size, 100 square inches, maybe 104 square inches, 95 square inches. Because there's a lot of versatility, a lot of flexibility and adjustability in these machines, you don't typically have to move these in and out too far. Now, if you happen to have your towers too far out, but you've been successful in stringing most rackets, and someone brings you, let's say, a Pro Staff 85, the original Pro Staff, you're probably going to need to move these towers in, whereas if you position them as I have them, you wouldn't have to do that. If you have your towers positioned a little too close together, which is probably what Clown Car 96 had going on, then if someone brings you a racket a little larger than you normally string, all of a sudden these don't touch, and you would be forced to adjust these and move the towers out. So where's the spot where you want them far enough apart, but not too far apart, that you can mount up anything from a Pro Staff, 85 square inch Pro Staff from the 80s, all the way up to 118 square inch, super oversized racket, or a 115 square inch TIS6. So now I responded and I said, oh, by the way, he alluded to the fact, he said, I'm sure there's an accessory for my Gamma machine, my Gamma XELS. There's no accessories, and I mentioned that. So I addressed him and I said, Clown Car 96, no accessory is necessary, at least not with your Gamma XELS. I said, so not to worry, you'll be fine once you have the mounting adjusted properly, which is what I'm about to tell you here. Since I have your number, I'll give you a call and get you all sorted out. Cheers, Wes. So we had corresponded before, and he either didn't think to contact me or forgot, whatever. And so knowing that I had his number and his real name, I just phoned him up. So anyway, we got that all sorted out. But I've covered this same information with other people, so I figured might as well make a video so that I don't have to, explain it all over and over again from time to time. So I'll show you how to optimally position this. Now later on, Brown Bear Falling said, based on Wes's experience, sounds like the mounting towers were not adjusted all the way out. Absolutely correct. Loosen the screw at the base of the tower to max them out. Well, you don't actually have to max it out. I mean, I suppose maybe if you extended these all the way to the very limit at the furthest point of the turntable, you may still be able to mount the TIS6, but I can tell you for sure that that's not necessary. You can put them in these positions and the TIS6 will be able to fit on here without you messing with this, and you'll be able to string all of your regular rackets all the way down to and including a Pro Staff 85. So, so you don't necessarily have to max these out. Then he talked about some other stuff regarding some Babla machines. And then at the end he made another comment. I'll come back to that in a moment about, he was talking about the Prince Neos 1000. So let me set that aside for the moment. So, I did some trial and error. I did not have a Pro Staff 85. When I figured all this out in these measurements and the optimization of these towers, I didn't actually have a Pro Staff 85 here to string when I was trying to do these little experiments. So I grabbed the smallest racket that I did have around, which is, or was at the time, this old Pog Mid. So these Pog Mids, although they are labeled a 90, they weren't actually 90 square inches. These were 93 square inches. So this is a 93 square inch hoop, not an 85 square inch hoop. But you'll see when we put this on, mount this in a minute, that there's plenty of extra room that a Pro Staff 85, like I said, a wooden racket will almost fit on here. So you can go really small. So we'll be using this as our lowest common denominator, or the smallest racket. And then the largest racket I had at the time, and I still have it, is this Wilson. And this Wilson is even larger, slightly, than the head TI-S6 that Clown Car 96 was trying to string. So this is actually a 118 square inch hoop. Okay, so this is going to be our largest racket. So the question was, is there an optimum place to put these two towers and be equidistant from the center or equal distance from the edges, that this can fit and this can fit by solely adjusting the 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock adjusters or billiards and not having to ever loosen this bolt or move these towers in or out? And the answer is yes. So, first let me mention something. The reason that this works is because these 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock supports or billiards have quite a healthy amount of adjustability. Now I've got this one to where it's just barely catching a few threads, but let me show you something. So basically this is as far in as you can extend it. Now I wouldn't want to extend it too far because this is like a square piece. You can see this square piece of metal slides into a square shaped hole over here, so that gives it some stability, and you wouldn't want that, you know, hanging out and be able to twist. But basically the threading on this part is just a little bit over 2 inches, and so basically, aside from, you know, catching a few threads there, you've got 2 inches that you can take up here. And when you take into account that there's another 2 inches over here that can be taken up, that allows you about 4-inch spread of adjustability that these alone can handle. So that's why this all works, is because if they were to use a much shorter stud here, which, you know, was only 1 inch long or 1.5 inches long, then this wouldn't necessarily work. But it's because this rod is quite long and is threaded the entire distance. So when you place this in here, you've got a lot of adjustability from it being all the way in, where you're just catching a few threads to make sure it doesn't come off, to, you know, screwing this 2 inches in and having this knob right up against this end of this square piece here. So here's how to set up how to optimize. With this turntable, which this is the same turntable, basically with the turntables that are on, say, the Gamma XST or the Progression ST, which is the crank machine, which this one's actually off of one of those, or if you have a Gamma 5003 or a Gamma 6004 or anything up from there, if you have the Progression ELS or the XELS like Clown Car 96 is using, same turntables, same dimensions, all of these measurements should work for you. Only if you have a Gamma drop weight, you have a slightly different turntable, and the distance from this far end to this far end is a little different, so I'll give you slightly different measurements here. So for these turntables, if you completely ignore the supports, the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock supports, so forget about those and just focus your eyes here on the edge of where this metal is sort of, you know, got a flat aspect here with it. You may or may not have this notch cut here. Some of the turntables have this notch here, some do not. But the point is either if you don't have a notch here, you can remove this billiard out of the picture or just measure just to the side of it. So not taking the billiards into account, measuring from this spot to this spot with a tape measure, you want those to be 14 inches apart and have these towers equidistant from the center of the turntable or equidistant from the ends of the turntable, and I'll give you the measurements for that in a moment. So just to show you real quickly, actually this will be easier for you to see this way. So right here we've got 14 inches from here to here. So that's the important number. And if when I show you the other turntable, that other turntable that's from a Gamma drop weight is also 14 inches from here to here. But the measurements down here on the ends, if you're measuring, the easiest way to me to keep it equidistant from the center of the turntable is to take a measurement from the very end here to the tower itself. So let me pop this off and show you. So the key is 14 inches across this span. And for this turntable, and most gamma turntables, that means you're going to want to position the edge of your tower here to, if you measure from the very end of this turntable here where my finger is, to the very bottom here of the tower itself, that's 2 inches. And I'll try to hold this in frame and show you that if I measure this, it's 2 inches, basically there where my thumb is. And I'll show you the other side in case the light is not catching, most of my lighting's coming from over there. Anyway, so that's, if you measure and position this tower, the edge of this, 2 inches, exactly 2 inches from here, and tighten that down, that's where you want it. And do the same thing over on the other side. Hopefully you can see a little better over on this side. I think you can. Lighting seems a little better. And so from the edge here to the edge here is exactly 2 inches. So if you have this type of turntable, put the mounting tower 2 inches from the end on both sides and then double check, and you should have a 14-inch span across the middle as I already showed you. If you have a gamma drop weight like this, so this one's actually from a gamma X6FC, which would be the same thing as a gamma progression 602FC, and is essentially the same turntable and same mounting towers that would be on a gamma X6 or a progression 602. The only difference is the gamma X6 and the progression 602. Notice both of those don't have the FC designation. FC is for fixed clamps, which this one has. So yours would look identical to this. You would have this center portion here, this center bar, but you wouldn't have this piece over here that's a slightly different color that has the base clamp track running through it. So obviously yours would just be this piece that's whatever, 2.5 inches wide. But essentially, it's the same thing. So again, if I measured the span from here to here, it's 14 inches, and the end measurement from the end of this tower edge here to the very end of this plastic piece that's on the end of the turntable bar, that's 1 inch and 3/8. So 1 3/8 inches on this side, 1 3/8 inches on that side. Should have each of the towers optimally positioned so that you have a 14-inch span from here to here on this type of turntable. So let me get this bolted down real quick. Okay, and I'll show you how having them positioned like this pays off for the vast majority of the rackets that you would be stringing. So, first, I'll show you the 118 square inch Wilson, how this fits. And I'll also talk about something that nobody else ever mentions about 6-point mount machines. And how you, if you have these towers too close to one another, even if everything mounts up and touches correctly, you can still have problems because the mounting itself can impede the clamps. And we'll talk about that actually. Let me put a clamp in here. I'll show you that in a minute. So for the time being, let's mount up this Wilson. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this 12 o'clock billiard. Obviously you want them equal, you know, you don't want the racket way offset. You don't want to work so hard to have the towers spaced equally from the center of the turntable and then have the billiards out of whack and have one of them extended really far in and the other one really far out. or vice versa. So what I do is I look down through the frame here. I'm going to bring this 12 o'clock billiard, I'm going to pull it in, I'm turning this knob clockwise over here until the inner edge of the hoop, basically where the grommets are, comes up, and I don't want any of this metal. In other words, if I did it too far, let me show you here. This may be out of frame, so I'm going to use this end of the turntable. So you don't want to do this and have it adjusted like this. Even though this is contacting and we can bring in the side supports, the problem is this mounting part of the hardware would then impede and prevent the clamps from getting to the top cross, potentially. Depends on how high the top cross is. So this is a piece of advice, is if you haven't strung a particular racket before, it's a good idea before you cut the strings out to mount it up and check to make sure that your clamps are going to reach everywhere they need to, i.e. the top cross, the bottom cross, outer mains. Make sure that you're not going to be running into the machine, the clamps aren't going to be running into the machine and the mounting itself. So to ensure that, when you have it mounted and you gaze down, sort of the way you're looking down on the racket, I don't have the camera directly above this, but pretty close. So the point is, I bring my head over the racket and I'm staring down through the hoop, and I don't want to see any of the machine down on the interior of the hoop. All of this metal and stuff should be outside the exterior of the hoop. And that's exactly what we'll have here. So if I put this on and I bring the 12 o'clock support up, I can go to about there. I don't want to go any further than that, or I potentially start having the mounting be extending into the interior of the hoop. Now see down here, I have a little bit still down here just above the throat. So I want to bring this up a little bit more. And that's basically how this is set up, so that this huge racket can be mounted here, and this string clamp can still get all the way up here, and it'll always be able to get down here to the bottom cross. So now that the 12 o'clock support is adjusted and I've brought the racket up just to the right spot on this end, now I can just push the 6 o'clock support up against the frame and tighten this knob. And as usual, you're not cranking these down super tight. I assume that you're familiar with how to mount a racket and how snug it should or shouldn't be. But the point is now those are positioned and the racket's not going to shift around. And you can see that I can slide it up and down those posts a little bit, because when I bring in these side supports, the racket's going to rise up a little bit, because this is called suspension mounting. It's not supposed to sit, the racket's not supposed to be down here on this pad. Anyway, so I bring in the side supports until this one is just starting to touch the frame. Then I look at the other side, bring it in, my eyes are over here now. And when that one's so they get them just touching, and then I turn the knob simultaneously, and that raises it up and has it equal. That way it doesn't push the racket too far left or right. And then I do the same thing from the throat. Bring this in till it's just starting to touch. This side in till it's just starting to touch. And now that they're touching, both of them together, which lifts the racket a little bit. And then finger snug. And then check the 12 and 6 o'clock. So now everything's mounted up just fine. And if you were looking immediately, directly straight down through the hoop, and I know that you aren't quite looking directly down through, but if you put your head there and look down through, you wouldn't see any of this mounting. In other words, let me lock the turntable, my string clamps can reach the mains way up here, anywhere that they need to get to. When I'm clamping the mains, I can get up close to the frame and the grommets. And then of course at some point you're going to flip the string clamp this way, and you'll be able to clamp really close to the frame on all of the spots along these mains, whether you're you're only going to be clamping towards the throat half the time and towards the head half the time. But the point is this does not interfere with any of the mains. And now check the cross. Can you get to the top cross, especially if the frame has a high top cross? That's why I say don't cut the strings out and then try to check this. It can be done, but you're going to need to put a dummy piece of string in there. You really need to want the crosses. You want some of these strings to be in there so that you can make these checks a lot easier. So imagine this has got a broken string in the middle. I can check. I can mount the racket, make sure that I don't see any of this mounting in here. Bring this clamp up and make sure that I can get to the top cross. For example, a lot of the Pure Strikes, the Bobble Pure Strikes come to mind. I don't have one. Actually, wait a minute. I might have one. Here we go. Some of the Bobble Pure Strikes have a very high top cross, and so you could potentially run into issues. See, you could get started on a racket. If you don't do these checks in advance, you could get started on a racket and successfully string in all the mains, and now you start the crosses and then you realize your clamp can't reach it. Or worse yet, if you like to use a starting clamp to hold your top cross, and then you get going, especially if you hold the starting clamp is on the top cross, and you start by tensioning the second cross, because you know you're going to come back and retension the top cross later, so there's no sense in tensioning it early. So you start by tensioning the second, and you can successfully reach and clamp the second all the way down the racket, and then you run into a problem at the very end of the racket. Your clamp can't reach the bottom cross. Or let's say that it can, and you successfully tied off. When you come back up here and retension the top cross to remove the starting clamp, you now can't get your machine's fixed clamp to reach the top cross. Point is make sure that the string clamps can reach everywhere they will need to reach before you get started. And it's easiest if the strings are still in the racket before you cut them out. But I can't remember. I want to say maybe the Clash 100 might have a high top cross. I don't know. Probably not as high as the Pure Strikes. And if you're stringing racquetball rackets and squash rackets, not all of them, but many of them have a notoriously high top cross. You know, they put the string pattern, you know, the strings further up on those rackets because you're hitting the ball so close to the wall that most of the ball strikes on a squash racket and a racquetball racket are close to the tip of the racket, not way down here. So anyway, the point is check. Make sure that your string clamp can actually get to the top cross. Make sure that it can actually get to the bottom cross and everywhere that it needs to go. So as you can see, a 118 square inch racket, which means that Clown Car 96's TIS6 that somebody gave him would mount up perfectly like this if his machine is adjusted like this. Now, let's say the next client, or let's say, you know, your wife plays a racket like this, or your father-in-law plays a racket like this, but you or your brother, somebody else in the family, or a client, if you string for clients, now brings you a real tiny, an old school Pro Staff 85 or a Pog Mid, so someone, or a Blade 93. Somebody brings you a 93 square inch racket like this. Here's how it goes. So obviously we will reverse all of this. And now, to fit this POG, I have to bring the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock supports a lot further in. Right now, that's as far in as they are. So I need to turn these knobs counterclockwise and extend these quite a bit, but I won't have to move the towers themselves. And if you're wondering how I know that I'm doing these evenly, you won't be able to see it from your vantage point. I'm staring down through this gap, this little piece that's cut out here, and I can see the edge of the where that square piece ends and where the threaded rod meet. So, you know, imagine my fist is the square female side of that block, and my finger is the threaded rod attached to here. I'm looking at this junction point here because I can see it there. So I'm just kind of using that as a visual reference point. So now when we mount this, I'm going to do the same thing. Before I adjust this 6 o'clock, I'm kind of looking at that gap, how much of a gap I do or don't have down here to get a kind of a reference point of, I want to pull this one in a little bit, and then I want this one in kind of a similar amount so that the hoop stays centralized relative to the center of the turntable and isn't offset one direction or the other. If you do offset a hoop because your towers are offset or because your billiards are offset in one direction or the other, then, especially if you cut your string lengths really short the way I do, you're going to end up having, you know, final strings that need to reach the tensioner shorter at one end of the racket, but a lot further on the other end, or vice versa. So, plus, you're just not going to be, it's not going to be repeatable. You're not going to get the same string job every single time if you're not getting the hoop centralized. That's one of the beauties of having a self-centering turntable like this, where you turn this knob at the end and it moves both of these towers in unison towards one another and away from one another. You cannot mount a racket on this type of turntable and it not be centered. It's automatic and it does it for you. So, because this hoop is much smaller than the other one, automatically all of this metal that potentially could have been in the way on that larger racket is going to be outside of the hoop. So we don't have to worry about that, but we do want to kind of keep these 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock supports equidistant relative to a visual point that I'm looking at here and here. So now, just like before, bring in the side supports. That one's just touching, and that one's just touching. Now, you're going to need to change the orientation. You know, these are adjustable on most Gamma machines. These are they sometimes have a knob underneath. Other manufacturers make these adjustable, but there's no knob underneath. They just kind of float in position. And my hands are, I need something. Those were just a little too tight for me to get my fingers. Okay, so when you bring these in, you're going to want to pivot them so that they contact the frame at a perpendicular angle. So because the other one was so large and I had this already set up for that one, these need to now be tweaked a little bit before we bring them all the way in. And then snug that up on each side. And then the throat end, same thing. This side is just touching. This side is just touching. Make sure that's 90 degrees. Make sure that's 90 degrees or perpendicular. And then bring them in the rest of the way. So finger tight, and check the 12 and 6 o'clock. Alright, so now everything's snug. And now, even though this racket doesn't have any strings in it, you can clearly see, hopefully, that this string clamp would have no trouble getting to accessing the bottom cross. I can touch all the grommets with the string clamp. So if I can touch the grommets with the string clamp, you can see that I'm not hitting the metal underneath here. Same thing up here. I can get to the outer mains. I can get to the inner mains. And I can get to the top cross on this racket. Would be 7 head. This racket only skips 7 head and 7 throat. So if I run a piece of scrap string through here, there's 7 on each side. You can see that that gets up to the top cross with ease, and I could get even higher. Same thing down here. So the string clamp can access every point inside the hoop without banging into any of the mounting. And like I said, this is a 93 square inch racket. But, so you might be thinking, well, Wes, sure, you can mount this 93 square inch racket. But how do we know that you could actually mount a Pro Staff, an 85 square inch Pro Staff 6.0 if someone brought it to you? Here's how you know that. Remember I said how much adjustability was in the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock support? If I open this up, well actually I don't need to open that up. This is a 93 square inch. If I bring these in, here's how much more adjustability is still left in each of these. So if I bring these in, the maximum amount towards the center of the turntable, you'll get a sense that a much smaller hoop than this would fit in here, because I mean I've got, you know, a ton of room here. So this is with them almost falling out, and they wouldn't have to come in this far to mount a Pro Staff, an 85 square inch Pro Staff. In fact, with them like this, with them just barely, you know, almost falling out, this is about where the wooden racket will almost fit onto these. And I'll show you that. So if I show you that a wooden racket that's got, I don't know, a 65 square inch hoop or something, if this woody can fit on there, you know that an 85 square inch Pro Staff will fit on here. So this is the Goldilocks point. 14 inches apart from here to here. This turntable, 2 inches from the end caps. And if you've got the drop weight gamma, it's still 14 inches here, and it's an inch and 3/8 from the end caps. So, before I talk about the 2-point turntable down on the floor, I want to address, so the last thing that Brown Bear Falling said was, I think this is an appropriate time to plug for the Neos 1000. The throat mount stretches out much longer than any modern machine and is still very stable when it's stretched out. Crazy that a design that old still beats modern design in ingenuity. Well, I don't know if it beats it, because as we've established, there are modern machines. Certain machines have this capability of stringing. You can mount a 137 square inch big Gamma Big Bubba on here. It makes sense that they should make their own machines capable of stringing their own rackets, right? It'd be kind of silly if Gamma sold a 137 square inch Big Bubba frame, but their Gamma machines weren't capable of stringing it. And obviously, in case it's not apparent, you can move these towers in and put the badminton adapters on here and string badminton rackets and everything. So you can pretty much string everything under the sun with this. So this might be the most versatile design, presuming that you have fixed swivel clamps. And that's what I want to address here, since he's talking about an appropriate time to plug the Neos 1000. So it's true that the throat adjuster on a Neos 1000 can be taken out and in quite a lot. However, it has some downfalls. The head tower or mount on a Prince Neos 1000 is immobile. It is stuck where it is. So you can only adjust the throat further out and further in to accommodate larger rackets. So there might be, let's say, if you're mounting up a kind of normal sized racket, that's a 100 square inch hoop on a Prince Neos, you know, it might be relatively centered, in regards to the center of the turntable. If you look at the center of the turntable on a Neos 1000, there's going to be a certain racket size, I don't know exactly what size it would be, that would happen to have the hoop centered. In other words, the head mount, which can't move, and the throat mount, which can, would actually be equidistant from the center, and therefore the racket would be centered. However, if someone has a smaller racket than whatever racket fits this description, so if someone brings in a smaller racket, then the head still has to be up here and the throat has to get moved in, and so now the center of the string bed is not in the center of the turntable. If someone brings them a TIS6 or a 118 square inch Wilson, the head still gets mounted at the same spot. The throat support has to be extended. So you're not always keeping the hoop centered relative to the turntable, and I don't want to go off into the technicalities of it, but the string pulls aren't going to be straight through the grommets in the center of the racket versus off center. It's just you're offsetting the racket. So that's one downfall of the Neos 1000 is it does have a lot of flexibility in that it can, you know, go in and out, but it can't keep the racket itself centered because the head end of the mount at the head end is frozen in place. The other thing is if the TIS, since the racket that started this whole conversation was the TIS6, which, as I'll remind you, I said has fan-shaped mains, slightly fan-shaped mains. Well, if you're using a Neos 1000, you've got glide bar clamps that run back and forth along bars that have to be parallel. They can't, you can't use a glide bar clamp at an angle like this. Well, not unless you bought one of those modification kits from David. But anyway, you're not going to be able to string, it's not going to go well if you try to use glide bar clamps on a racket that's got fan-shaped mains, whether it's a tennis racket or a racquetball. Since most racquetball rackets these days have fan-shaped mains, squash rackets is about a 50-50 split. You got a coin flip, about half of them have grid-shaped strings just like most tennis rackets do, and then about half of them have fan-shaped mains like most racquetball rackets do. So a Neos 1000 wouldn't work super well on the TIS6 because of its fan-shaped mains. Anyway, so just wanted to address that the Neos 1000 is a great machine. It's obviously the Honda Accord of stringing machines. It's been around forever. Virtually nothing has changed on it in design. However, even the Neos 1000, with its longevity and with its status, it still has some pitfalls. So I wouldn't say that it's better or beats a modern design. So there are machines out there that these towers don't move at all. You know, the Neos 1000, as I mentioned, only the head mounting is stuck. The throat can move. But the original Wilson Biardo, these towers do not move in or out. That was one of its downfalls. So if you were trying to string a racket with a really small head, it posed some problems. There were some Babala machines where these towers didn't adjust in and out. So if you wanted to string like a badminton racket, you had to have a whole separate kit, which was basically super long billiards. You had to basically take the 6 o'clock and the 12 o'clock billiards out that were, shorter for tennis, and install these really long ones so that these could now be here near the center of the turntable. They weren't long enough. You couldn't change the towers. So that means that the side supports, you just had to contact the racket wherever it contacted the racket. With you being able to move each tower independently, you can also fine-tune where the side supports happen to touch the racket, so that you're getting, the best contact along the contour. You're not, you don't want these really close together, touching, here and here, and you don't want them touching here and here. So this allows you the most versatility and flexibility. So if someone said, what type of machine should I buy that would allow me to string anything? What's truly the most versatile? I would say some type of gamma machine, 6-point mount like this, that has fixed swivel clamps, and then you could string anything regardless of whether it's a tiny little badminton racket, old school wooden racket, a Pro Staff 85, a 100 square inch tweener racket, a 118 square inch racket, all the way up to 100 and including 137 square inch Big Bubba. And when I've strung 137 square inch Big Bubba frames, and it still doesn't force you to maximize, to go to the very, very end of the turntable. Like I said, 99% of the time, I am using this other turntable. Let me show you that quickly. By the way, it takes no time at all to swap out turntables on a gamma machine like this. 4 bolts. So this is, like I said, this is a self-centering turntable. You turn this knob or this knob. They're on the same rod inside the turntable, and either one of them, they're just at both ends for convenience. When you turn these, you can bring these really far in. I'm not going to go grab a badminton racket to show you this. I have another video all about badminton mounting on both 6-point and 2-point. But anyway, the point is these come in more than enough to fit a badminton racket here. And to my point about the Big Bubba or any super oversized rackets, these go out really far, but you don't have to go all the way to the very end to fit a Big Bubba 137 on this turntable. So I'll go as far to the maximum and show you where the max is, but you still don't have to max it out. Like that. That's how far apart they are. And that's currently bigger than the hoop dimensions of a Big Bubba 137. So I'm just estimating, I would say that they probably are about there. So there's still a little bit of play there. So you can pretty much mount everything under the sun on any of these Gamma turntables. So hopefully I covered, I know that was really long, but hopefully I covered a lot of information that a lot of people didn't know, as well as the secret spot to position your towers. If you've got adjustable towers on each end, loosen them up, put them at the dimensions that I told you, and you will typically not have to adjust them in or out for the vast majority of frames. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.